Wealth, when you think about it, is a peculiar thing. We imagine it as solid, permanent, gold bars stacked in vaults, great estates sprawling across valleys, factories humming with production. But history tells a different story. History whispers that wealth is more like smoke than stone, more like water than walls. It flows, it vanishes, it transforms in ways that defy our assumptions about permanence. And nowhere in human history has this truth been more dramatically demonstrated than in the ashes of 1945, when the greatest accumulation of industrial wealth the world had ever seen simply evaporated into the air like morning mist. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if these history tales fascinate you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. May 8th, 1945. Berlin burns. The smoke rises in columns so thick they blot out the spring sun, turning midday into twilight. The Reich Chancellery, that monument to absolute power built with marble torn from conquered nations, lies open to the sky. Soviet artillery has done its work, but already, before the guns fall silent, another kind of warfare has begun. This one involves ledgers instead of bullets, bank vaults instead of bunkers. Consider the speed of it. 360 billion Reichsmarks, the entire liquid wealth of the German Reich, vanishes in weeks, not destroyed, not captured, vanished. American investigators race through the ruins, their boots crunching, on broken glass and pulverized brick, searching for the financial heart of the fallen empire. They descend into the vaults beneath the Reichsbank, that fortress of finance on Verdischer Markt. The lights flicker on. The massive steel doors swing open, empty. 800 tons of gold, stacked in neat rows just months before, has disappeared. Gone are the reserves that backed a currency, that financed a war machine, that represented the accumulated wealth of conquered nations. In their place, dust, echoes, and silence. The investigators stand in those empty chambers, trying to comprehend absence on this scale. It's like arriving at the ocean and finding it drained. But the monument's men, those unlikely soldiers tasked with saving civilization's treasures, discover something else entirely. In salt mines scattered across Austria and Bavaria, they find hoards that defy imagination. The Altusee mine alone contains 14,000 paintings, stacked like cordwood, in chambers carved from ancient salt deposits. Rembrandts lean against Vermeers, Rubens rest beside Dürers. The humidity is perfect for preservation at 68%. The temperature holds steady at 47 degrees Fahrenheit, never varying. These caves have protected salt for 250 million years. Now they guard humanity's artistic heritage, yet for every masterpiece recovered, 10 fortunes slip away. Family collections that took generations to assemble scatter like autumn leaves in a gale. A Monet here, a Klimt there, each one disappearing into channels prepared years in advance by families who saw catastrophe approaching and made their preparations accordingly. The dismantling begins before the surrender documents dry. Soviet dismantling crews arrive in the Eastern Territories with military precision and lists checked twice. They know exactly what they want. The Opel automobile works in Brandenburg. 1,000 machines, carefully numbered and catalogued, begin their journey to the Soviet Union on May 15th. The Krupp steel mills in Essen, those furnaces that forged the weapons of 2 world wars, fall silent on May 23rd. By June, Soviet engineers supervise the careful disassembly of rolling mills, blast furnaces, and precision lathes. This isn't random looting. This is systematic transfer of industrial capacity on a scale never before attempted. The crews work through the night under arc lights, their breath visible in the cold air. They wrap turbines in grease-soaked canvas. They crate delicate instruments in wooden boxes packed with straw. 1,500 complete factories begin their migration eastward, loaded onto trains that run day and night through the summer of 1945. The Americans pursue different prizes. Operation Paperclip extracts 1,600 scientists, engineers, and technicians. Werner von Braun and his rocket team at Peenemünde scatter as the Soviets approach, heading west with blueprints stuffed in briefcases and calculations memorized. They know something profound. The knowledge in their heads is worth more than all the gold in all the vaults. You can rebuild a factory from memory. You can reconstruct formulas from first principles, but you cannot recreate decades of accumulated expertise overnight. American teams race against time, photographing documents, 1,800,000 tons of technical papers, specifications, processes, formulas, techniques. They work in basements and bunkers, setting up lights and cameras, turning pages, clicking shutters. Each photograph captures information that cost millions of marks and years of research to develop. By autumn, before the Soviets can seize these repositories, the knowledge flows westward on microfilm, compressed and portable. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, something remarkable occurs. Bank accounts swell. Between May and November of 1945, Swiss banks report inflows of $10 billion. $10 billion in 6 months. In a country that maintained strict neutrality throughout the war, that asked no questions about the source of deposits, that pioneered the numbered account system where names disappeared behind digits. The human dimension unfolds in millions of individual decisions made under impossible pressure. Friedrich Flick stands in his office overlooking the Ruhr Valley and watches 40 years of industrial empire collapse in 40 days. He built his fortune bolt by bolt, acquisition by acquisition, until he controlled coal mines, steel mills, and manufacturing plants across Germany. Now Allied bombing has reduced his facilities to rubble. Soviet and American teams argue over what remains. Flick himself faces war crimes prosecution. Everything solid melts into air. The Quandt family sees their 100 factories, batteries, textiles, precision instruments, scattered across the occupation zones like seeds in the wind. Herbert Quandt, 35 years old, returns from internment to find his inheritance fragmented beyond recognition. His stepmother, Magda Goebbels, born Magda Quandt, takes her own life in Hitler's bunker on May 1st, after poisoning her 6 children. The family's industrial empire seems to die with her. 10 million ethnic Germans flee westward ahead of Soviet advance, carrying what they can. Families that owned estates spanning thousands of acres in East Prussia, Silesia, and Pomerania become refugees overnight. They pile possessions onto wagons, grandmother's silver, father's books, mother's jewelry, but most of it falls by the roadside as hunger and exhaustion take their toll. A nation's wealth transforms from solid matter into desperate hope carried in coat pockets and sewn into linings. Farmers in Bavaria, watching newsreels of Soviet occupation, make calculations. They dig holes beneath apple trees in the autumn of 1945, working at night by lantern light. Gold coins disappear into the earth. Wembley heirlooms wrapped in oilcloth find new homes in root cellars and beneath barn floors. They're burying more than wealth. They're burying the possibility of resurrection, the seed capital for whatever comes next. Mothers sew diamonds into children's coat linings, threading needles by candlelight while Russian artillery rumbles in the distance. A single diamond, no bigger than a pea, might buy passage west, might purchase food for a month, might become the foundation for starting over. Women who never worked with their hands learn to sew invisible pockets, create hidden compartments, disguise valuables as common buttons. In the cities, different strategies emerge. Wealthy families who maintained connections across borders quietly transfer assets through the bank for international settlements in Basel. This peculiar institution, created to handle German reparations from the First World War, somehow maintained operations throughout the Second. Its diplomatic immunity and technical neutrality made it a perfect conduit for transferring wealth beyond the reach of advancing armies. Art dealers and collectors employ their own methods. Paintings come off walls in Berlin mansions and Bavarian castles. Some go into salt mines for safekeeping. Others travel different routes, A Kandinsky disappears into a Swiss vault. A Klee makes its way to Liechtenstein. These aren't stolen treasures, but privately owned collections. Being moved by owners who understand that possession means nothing if you cannot protect what you possess. The scale of disappearance defies easy accounting. Allied investigators eventually calculate that the Reichsbank held reserves worth approximately 800 tons of gold on January 1st, 1945. By May 8th, perhaps 200 tons remain in Allied hands. The rest, some went to pay for last-ditch military operations. Some purchased safe passage for Nazi officials fleeing to South America. Some simply vanished into numbered accounts there to sleep for decades. But gold, for all its symbolic power, represents only part of the story. The real wealth of Germany lay in its industrial capacity, its educated workforce, its technical knowledge, its organizational systems. These prove harder to quantify and harder still to confiscate. You can load a factory onto a train. You can force an engineer to work in a foreign land. But you cannot capture the intricate web of relationships, the accumulated wisdom, the cultural practices that made Germany Europe's industrial powerhouse. Consider what has truly been lost and what merely transformed. The factories may be dismantled, but the engineers who designed them still live. The gold may be hidden, but it hasn't ceased to exist. The bank accounts may be frozen, but the claims remain valid. Wealth, it turns out, is more complicated than simple possession. It exists in multiple forms simultaneously. Physical assets, human capital, social networks, cultural practices, legal claims. As summer fades into autumn in 1945, Germany lies in ruins so complete that visitors from abroad struggle to comprehend the scale. Hamburg is 75% destroyed. Dresden is a lunar landscape. Berlin's population has fallen from 4.3 million to 2.8 million. The survivors live in cellars and damaged apartments, burning furniture for warmth, trading cigarettes for bread, wondering if civilization itself has ended. Yet beneath the visible devastation, invisible networks persist. Banking relationships maintained across borders, family connections spanning continents, technical knowledge carried in minds that survived when buildings burned. The apprenticeship system that transmitted skills from master to journeyman to apprentice for 500 years. The work ethic encoded in cultural memory. These intangibles prove harder to destroy than any physical infrastructure. The question hanging over Europe in the winter of 1945 is whether Germany can ever recover. The doubters see only destruction. 8 million homes destroyed or damaged. 90% of urban housing stock in major cities uninhabitable. Transportation systems shattered. Factories dismantled or bombed into scrap. Currency worthless. Government dissolved. The nation carved into occupation zones, ruled by foreign powers who agree on nothing except that Germany must never threaten peace again. But a few observers, looking more carefully, notice something else. They see the Trümmerfrauen, the rubble women, beginning their work even before the war officially ends. These women, whose husbands died in the war or languish in prisoner camps, form human chains to pass bricks from ruined buildings. They sort salvageable materials from waste. They clear paths through debris. 600 million cubic meters of rubble will be moved by hand, brick by brick. Over the next 3 years, the observers notice engineers meeting quietly in basements, sketching plans, calculating what can be rebuilt and how. They see families reconnecting across occupation zones, sharing information, moving resources, preparing for whatever comes next. They detect the first stirrings of something that will astonish the world within a decade, Germany's resurrection from total destruction. But in 1945, that resurrection remains invisible. Buried beneath ash and rubble like those gold coins hidden beneath Bavarian apple trees, waiting for spring. The clock strikes midnight in Jena on June 15, 1945. Soviet officers arrive at the Carl Zeiss optical works with lists in hand and trucks waiting in the darkness. They give the workers 6 hours. 6 hours to prepare instruments that took decades to perfect. machines that represent the pinnacle of optical engineering for immediate transport to the Urals. Imagine being one of those workers. You've spent your entire adult life grinding lenses to tolerances measured in wavelengths of light, calibrating instruments that can see the moons of Jupiter, creating microscopes that reveal the architecture of cells. Your father worked here. Your grandfather helped build these machines. Now men with clipboards and armed guards tell you to wrap your life's work in whatever packing material you can find and load it onto railcars before dawn. The Zeiss workers move through their factory in a kind of trance, wrapping precision instruments in blankets, cushioning delicate optics with straw and sawdust. The master craftsmen try to explain to Soviet engineers which machines require climate control, which instruments cannot tolerate vibration, which components must travel together. Some of the explanations land, many do not. By 6 in the morning, the railcars depart eastward, carrying Germany's optical supremacy toward the Soviet Union. This scene repeats across the Soviet occupation zone throughout the summer and autumn of 1945. The dismantling follows a ruthless logic. The Soviet Union lost 27 million people in the war. Its industrial heartland in Ukraine and Western Russia lies devastated. Stalin demands reparations not in money. German currency is worthless, but in productive capacity. Entire factories will move east to replace what German armies destroyed. The Americans pursue different prizes, though with equal determination. Operation Paperclip begins as a small effort to grab German rocket scientists before the Soviets can claim them. It expands into something far more ambitious. The American teams realize that Germany's real wealth lies not in its bombed factories, but in the minds of the people who designed them. Werner von Braun becomes the prize catch. He and his team of rocket engineers surrendered to American forces in May, bringing with them 14 tons of documents hidden in a mine shaft. Von Braun understands the mathematics of orbital mechanics, the metallurgy of rocket nozzles, the chemistry of liquid fuels. This knowledge is worth billions, perhaps more. The Americans whisk him and 127 of his colleagues to Fort Bliss, Texas, where they begin designing the rockets that will eventually carry Americans to the moon. Werner Heisenberg, the physicist who led Germany's nuclear program, becomes another focus of Allied attention. Both Americans and Soviets want to know how close Germany came to building an atomic bomb. Heisenberg and 9 other German nuclear scientists find themselves detained in Farm Hall, a country house in England, where British intelligence secretly records their conversations. The Allies need to know what these men know, who else knows it, and how to prevent that knowledge from spreading. The French take a different approach. They focus on the Black Forest, that vast expanse of timber that has sustained German construction and furniture making for centuries. French engineers don't just want the lumber mills. They want the forestry management systems, the sustainable harvesting techniques developed over generations. They systematically strip the Black Forest of its mills, taking not just machines, but the accumulated wisdom of centuries of forest management. British teams concentrate on the Ruhr Valley, that industrial heart that once produced 40% of European steel. They arrive with accountants and engineers, calculating reparations down to the last bolt. The mathematics is precise. Germany owes $10 billion to the Soviet Union, $1.5 billion to the Western Allies. Every lathe must be counted, every turbine assessed, every precision gauge inventoried. The British work with a kind of grim determination. They remember the devastation of London, Coventry, Birmingham. They lost 450,000 civilians to German bombing. Now they methodically dismantle the furnaces and rolling mills that forged the weapons. Each piece of equipment represents both punishment for past aggression and prevention of future threat. Yet even as factories cross borders, wealth proves more elusive. Swiss banking secrecy, already well established before the war, becomes an impenetrable fortress afterward. The numbered account system reaches new heights of sophistication. Account holders become simply numbers, no names on any documents that could be seized or subpoenaed. The Swiss argue that banking secrecy protects persecuted minorities, perhaps, but it also protects German industrialists who saw the war coming and made their preparations. The Bank Loy in Zurich, established in 1755, perfects the art of discretion. Clients arrive, make their deposits, receive a number. No questions asked about source of funds. No records kept that connect names to accounts. By late 1945, Swiss banks hold an estimated $15 billion in assets that fled Germany. More than the entire Marshall Plan will eventually provide for European recovery. Liechtenstein, that tiny principality tucked between Switzerland and Austria, develops its own specialty. The Anstalt Foundation allows wealth to disappear behind legal structures nearly impossible to penetrate. A German industrialist can transfer assets to an Anstalt, which technically owns the property. The industrialist controls the foundation through private agreements never registered publicly. Allied investigators, trying to trace assets, hit walls of Liechtenstein law, Swiss banking secrecy, and Vatican diplomatic immunity. The Vatican Bank, the Institute for Religious Works, plays its own quiet role. Founded in 1942, ostensibly to manage the financial affairs of religious orders, it enjoys diplomatic immunity as part of Vatican City's status as a sovereign state. Throughout late 1945 and into 1946, mysterious transfers flow through Vatican accounts. Catholic priests provide documentation. Red Cross officials, some knowingly participating, others genuinely deceived, issue travel papers. The rat lines begin to function. Ships depart from Genoa, carrying passengers whose backgrounds dissolve at the waterline. Former SS officers become Argentine businessmen. Nazi party officials transform into Brazilian engineers. The ships sail south, and with them goes capital. Gold converted to dollars, diamonds sewn into clothing, bearer bonds tucked into false-bottomed suitcases. Buenos Aires receives its first wave of German immigrants in the autumn of 1945. They arrive with surprising resources. Within months, German-speaking communities appear in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay. Coffee plantations. In Brazil, suddenly acquired German managers with impressive technical backgrounds. Chilean copper mines find themselves directed by engineers who speak Spanish with distinct Bavarian accents. These men arrive with capital, connections, and knowledge. The pattern repeats in whispers and shadows. A submarine leaves Kiel in April 1945, supposedly bound for Norway. It never arrives. Intelligence reports place it off the coast of Argentina in July. What was it carrying? Gold bars, diamonds, industrial secrets? The submarine vanishes into the South Atlantic, becoming one of dozens of rumors that will persist for decades. Some prove true, most remain mysteries. Art tells its own story of wealth in motion. The Monuments Men recover 14,000 paintings from Altaussee, but they represent only a fraction of what disappeared. Consider the mathematics. Germany held approximately 650,000 significant artworks in public and private collections in 1939. Allied forces eventually recover about 100,000. Where did the other 550,000 go? Some were destroyed in bombing raids. Dresden's firestorm consumed priceless collections. Berlin's museums burned, but destruction accounts for perhaps 100,000 pieces. The remaining 450,000. They scattered like seeds in a gale, private collections shipped to Switzerland years before the war ends. Families who sensed approaching catastrophe moved their Rembrandts to Zurich vaults in 1942. Jewish collectors forced to sell their Klimts for survival. Those paintings passed through dealers in neutral countries, their provenance deliberately obscured. The amber room disappears entirely. This masterpiece, panels of amber backed with gold leaf, created for Frederick I of Prussia in 1701, was valued at $150 million in 1945. In 2025 terms, that's worth approximately $800 million. It vanished from Catherine Palace near Leningrad in October 1941, when German forces captured the region. Some theories place it in Königsberg, destroyed by British bombing in August 1944. Others believe it was hidden in tunnels beneath the city. Still others suggest it reached Germany and lies buried somewhere in Saxony or Bavaria. 70 years of searching have yielded nothing, but the Amber Room represents only the most spectacular loss. Thousands of lesser treasures slip through the cracks. A Dürer woodcut hidden behind a false wall in a Munich apartment. A collection of medieval manuscripts buried in a monastery garden. A cache of Renaissance jewelry sewn into the lining of a trunk. These items surface decades later, often by accident. A grandchild cleaning out an attic. A demolition crew breaking through a wall. An estate sale revealing unexpected treasures. The dismantling continues through 1946 and into 1947. The Soviets systematically empty the eastern zone. By some estimates, they remove 75% of industrial capacity from what will become East Germany. Machine tools, railroad equipment, electrical generating stations, everything portable begins the journey east. The Americans eventually halt their own dismantling efforts, realizing that a productive Germany might prove more valuable than a devastated one. But the Soviets continue, driven by legitimate fury over their own losses and Stalin's determination to extract every possible advantage. French dismantling crews work with particular thoroughness in the Saar region, that coal-rich area that France and Germany have contested for centuries. They don't just take equipment. They recruit German miners and engineers, offering them housing and wages in France. The knowledge transfer proves more valuable than the machinery. You can rebuild a steel mill, but you cannot quickly recreate the expertise that makes it productive. By late 1947, the great dismantling begins to slow. The Cold War changes calculations. The Truman administration realizes that a strong West Germany is essential to containing Soviet expansion. The policy shifts from punishment to reconstruction. But by then, the damage is complete. The Soviet zone has been stripped of its industrial heart. 1,500 factories have migrated east. Countless skilled workers have fled west. The capital stock of Eastern Germany, once the most industrialized region in Europe, has been reduced by an estimated 60 to 70%. Yet even in this systematic extraction, wealth proves slippery. The Soviets can take factories, but they struggle to make them productive in their new locations. Machines designed for German electrical standards don't work well on Soviet power grids. Precision instruments calibrated for European climates malfunction in Siberian cold. Engineers forced to work in the Urals prove less productive than engineers working voluntarily in their homeland. Knowledge, it turns out, is bound to culture, climate, and context in ways that complicate simple transfer. And throughout this massive movement of physical capital, the invisible wealth flows through different channels entirely. Banking relationships preserved, family networks maintained across oceans, technical knowledge carried in minds that cannot be searched at borders. Cultural capital embedded in work habits, organizational methods, and social trust. These intangibles survive the dismantling, waiting for conditions that will allow them to flourish again. As 1947 ends and 1948 begins, Germany exists in a kind of suspended animation. The dismantling is complete. The visible wealth is gone. The factories stand empty or vanished. The currency is worthless. By every physical measure, Germany should be finished. The skeptics predict generations of poverty and dependence, but they're measuring the wrong things. June 20th, 1948. A Sunday. Ludwig Erhard, an economist with no political party affiliation, performs what would be called economic alchemy. At 8 in the evening, he announces on radio that Germany will have a new currency the next morning. The Reichsmark, that worthless paper Germans have been using as wallpaper and kindling, will die. The Deutsche Mark will be born. Every German receives 40 new marks. A factory owner receives 40 marks. A homeless widow receives 40 marks. A banker receives 40 marks. Old money converts at a ratio of 10:1 for the first 60 Reichsmarks, then 100:1 for anything beyond that. In practical terms, this means 93.5% of all monetary wealth evaporates overnight. Life savings accumulated over decades become pocket change. War profiteers who accumulated millions find themselves holding worthless paper. The psychological effect surpasses the economic one. For 3 years, Germans have hoarded goods, knowing their currency was worthless. Farmers refused to sell food for Reichsmarks. Manufacturers stockpiled products. The black market became the only functional economy, with cigarettes serving as the real currency. A single American cigarette could buy a meal. A carton could buy a week's groceries. Barter replaced commerce. On Monday morning, June 21st, shop windows fill with goods that weren't there on Saturday. Shoes appear on shelves that stood empty for years. Fabric, tools, household items, all the products manufacturers had been hiding flood into stores. The transformation happens in hours. By Tuesday, the black market has collapsed. Why trade cigarettes when you have currency that holds value? Why hoard goods when you can sell them for money that will still be worth something tomorrow? Consider the elegance of it. Erhard's reform doesn't create new wealth. It doesn't rebuild factories or clear rubble. It simply establishes trust in money again. But that trust unleashes everything else. Workers who wouldn't labor for worthless Reichsmarks now work for Deutsche Marks. Farmers who hoarded food now sell it. Manufacturers who stockpiled goods now distribute them. The economy doesn't grow. It reveals itself like a photograph developing in solution. The currency reform works because it destroys wealth equally. The Nazi Party official who profited from war contracts loses his millions. The widow who saved diligently loses her nest egg. But both start with 40 marks. This radical equality creates something profound, the sense that everyone begins from the same starting point, that the playing field has been leveled, that merit rather than connections will determine success. Yet the currency reform alone couldn't work without what arrives alongside it. The Marshall Plan, announced by Secretary of State George Marshall in June 1947, begins delivering aid in April 1948. The timing is not accidental. American planners know that currency reform without capital investment would simply create a stable framework for poverty. Germany needs both sound money and actual resources. The numbers tell one story. The Marshall Plan will eventually deliver $1.4 billion to West Germany over 4 years. In today's terms, that's approximately $17 billion. It sounds massive. It is massive. But consider the scale of destruction. Germany needs to rebuild 8 million housing units, reconstruct transportation networks spanning the country, restore industrial capacity that produced 40% of European output. $1.4 billion is meaningful, but insufficient. The real miracle emerges from the rubble itself. Those Trümmerfrauen, rubble women, who began clearing debris in 1945, continue their work. By 1948, they've moved hundreds of millions of cubic meters of broken buildings, sorted usable bricks from waste, created cleared spaces where reconstruction can begin. These women, whose husbands died in the war or languish in Soviet prison camps, work for minimal wages. They work because they must. They work because Germany needs clearing before it can rebuild. The sorted bricks become the foundation of resurrection. In 1939, Germany had strict building codes requiring new bricks for construction. By 1948, necessity overrides regulations. Gleaned and sorted bricks from destroyed buildings become the material for new ones. The rubble of the old Germany literally becomes the substance of the new one. Destruction transforms into construction with nothing wasted. But bricks alone don't build an economy. Knowledge does. And here, Germany possesses wealth that bombs couldn't destroy and dismantling couldn't confiscate. The apprenticeship system, that centuries-old method of transferring skills from master to journeyman, survived the war intact. In basement workshops across Germany, master craftsmen train young apprentices in skills the world demands. A machinist who learned his trade before the war now trains teenagers in precision work. A toolmaker who spent decades perfecting his craft teaches apprentices to read blueprints, measure tolerances, understand metallurgy. These skills, encoded in muscle memory and practical knowledge, prove nearly impossible to destroy. You can bomb a factory, but you cannot bomb the knowledge of how to build one. You can confiscate machinery, but you cannot confiscate the understanding of how machines work. The Volkswagen factory in Wolfsburg tells the story in miniature. British forces occupy the facility in 1945 and consider it worthless. The factory is severely damaged. The equipment is outdated. The design, the Beetle, seems hopelessly old-fashioned. British automotive experts examine it and recommend scrapping the entire operation. They cannot imagine that this damaged factory producing a pre-war design could compete in the modern world. The British are wrong. Heinrich Nordhoff takes over management in 1948 and sees what others missed. The Beetle's design is simple, making it cheap to produce. The factory's workers know how to build cars efficiently. The car itself is reliable and economical. Nordhoff focuses on quality control, incremental improvement, and consistent production. In 1948, the factory produces 30 Beetles per day. By 1950, it manufactures 1,000 per day. By 1960, Volkswagen becomes the world's fourth largest automaker. This pattern, dismissed assets transforming into economic engines, repeats across Germany. The Mittelstand, those small and medium enterprises that form Germany's economic backbone, sprout from family savings hidden during the collapse. Remember those farmers burying gold coins beneath apple trees? They dig them up in 1948 and 49, converting hidden wealth into seed capital for new ventures. Hans Liebherr starts with 80 Deutsche Marks in his mother's garden, shed in Kirchdorf an der Iller. He begins building tower cranes using salvage materials and borrowed tools. The first crane he builds is crude but functional. Construction companies rebuilding Germany need cranes desperately. Liebherr sells his first crane, uses the proceeds to build 2 more, reinvests constantly. By 1954, his company employs 1,000 workers. Today, the Liebherr Group generates over 10 billion euros annually, produces mining equipment, aerospace components, and remains family-owned. The Albrecht brothers, Karl and Theo, return from the war to find their mother's small grocery store in Essen. She has saved 3,000 Reichsmarks, which becomes 300 Deutsche Marks after currency reform. Not much, but enough. The brothers envision something radical, a discount grocery store with minimal selection, no frills presentation, and rock-bottom prices. They call it Aldi, short for Albrecht Discount. The concept seems crazy in 1948 when Germans have so little money. But the Albrechts understand something profound. People with limited resources want maximum value, not maximum choice. The first Aldi stores are sparse, concrete floors, products displayed in their shipping boxes, no advertising. The brothers negotiate ruthlessly with suppliers, eliminate any expense that doesn't directly reduce prices, pass savings to customers. By 1955, they operate 100 stores. By 1961, they've expanded to 300. Today, Aldi operates over 10,000 stores worldwide, generating over 50 billion euros in annual revenue. The Albrecht family becomes one of the wealthiest in Germany, all from 300 Deutsche Marks and a radical idea about retailing. These aren't isolated miracles. They're patterns. Families activate networks preserved through catastrophe. A textile manufacturer whose factory was bombed reconnects with former customers in Switzerland and Belgium. They remember him as reliable, honest, delivering quality goods. They're willing to place orders again if he can produce. He finds a small facility, hires skilled workers, starts production. Within months, he's exporting again. A machine tool maker whose equipment was confiscated rebuilds from memory. He doesn't need the actual machines. He knows how they work, how to improve them, how to make them more efficient. He sketches designs, finds metalworkers, constructs prototypes. His new tools prove better than the old ones because he's incorporated years of experience into the design. Orders arrive from across Europe. The knowledge transfer from father to son, master to apprentice, expert to novice continues unbroken despite the war. A master optician in Munich, whose shop was destroyed, trains his son in the craft. The son doesn't just learn to grind lenses. He absorbs decades of accumulated wisdom about optics, precision, quality control. When he opens his own shop in 1949, he brings this inheritance of knowledge that no amount of money could purchase. Technical universities reopen. The Technical University of Munich resumes classes in 1946 in damaged buildings with improvised equipment. Students sit on rubble in classrooms open to the sky, taking notes while instructors teach advanced engineering. The content matters more than the facilities. These students will become the engineers who design Germany's industrial resurrection. The Marshall Plan money amplifies German efforts rather than replacing them. American aid buys raw materials Germany cannot produce: cotton, oil, certain metals. It purchases machine tools to replace those dismantled. It funds infrastructure projects, bridges, roads, electrical grids that individual companies cannot afford. But the aid works because it supports German initiative rather than substituting for it. Consider the psychology of the Marshall Plan versus reparations. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles imposed crushing reparations that strangled German recovery and fostered resentment. After World War II, the Marshall Plan offers aid conditional on cooperation and reform. The psychological difference is immense. Germans receiving Marshall Plan aid feel they're being helped to rebuild, not punished for losing. This shifts the entire emotional context of reconstruction. By 1950, signs of recovery become unmistakable. Industrial production reaches 1936 levels. Housing construction accelerates. In 1950 alone, Germany builds 300,000 new housing units. Unemployment drops from 2 million in 1948 to 1 million in 1950. The economic growth rate hits 8% annually, a pace that will accelerate further. The work ethic becomes legendary. Germans work 10, 12, 14-hour days rebuilding their country. This isn't unique to Germany. People everywhere work hard. But the combination of technical skill, organizational ability, and relentless effort produces results that astonish observers. American and British officials visiting Germany in 1950 report that the recovery exceeds all predictions. The cultural substrate supporting economic growth runs deep. Germans possess what sociologists call high social trust, the expectation that others will behave reliably and honestly. This trust, even after the trauma of war and dictatorship, facilitates commerce. Business agreements happen on handshakes. Suppliers deliver on time. Workers show up reliably. The transaction costs of economic activity remain low because trust remains high. The education system, despite wartime disruption, maintains standards. German engineers graduating in 1950 are as well trained as those who graduated in 1935. The content of education survived even when the buildings didn't. Professors who hid in the countryside during bombing emerged to teach again. Textbooks are improvised from pre-war editions. Knowledge flows across generations despite the interruption. By 1952, Germany's economic output surpasses pre-war levels. This seems impossible. The country lost 25% of its territory. Its industrial capacity was systematically dismantled. Its currency collapsed. Its government dissolved. Yet within 7 years of total defeat, Germany is producing more than it did at the height of Nazi power. The explanation lies in what was preserved versus what was destroyed. The bombing destroyed physical capital, buildings, factories, infrastructure. The dismantling removed more physical capital, machines, equipment, tools. But neither bombing nor dismantling destroyed human capital, social capital, or cultural capital. The skills remained. The relationships endured. The organizational methods persisted. The work ethic survived. Moreover, the destruction created unexpected opportunities. Old inefficient factories were destroyed, forcing reconstruction with modern methods. Obsolete equipment was confiscated, requiring purchase of new, more productive machinery. Established companies disappeared, opening space for new entrepreneurs with fresh ideas. The slate wasn't just wiped clean, it was prepared for something better. The currency reform eliminated debts along with savings. Companies that owed millions in worthless Reichsmarks suddenly owed nothing. They started fresh with balance sheets cleared. This debt jubilee, combined with sound money and growing markets, created conditions for rapid expansion. By 1955, the economic miracle is undeniable. Germany surpasses Britain in industrial production. Exports boom as German goods, cameras, cars, machine tools, chemicals, flood global markets. The quality is exceptional. The prices are competitive. The deliveries reliable. Made in Germany, once a mark of wartime aggression, becomes a symbol of quality and precision. The Beetle becomes an icon. Over 21 million will eventually be produced, making it the best-selling car design in history. Mercedes-Benz resumes production of luxury vehicles that command premium prices worldwide. Siemens rebuilds its electrical equipment business. BASF, Bayer and Hoechst dominate chemical markets. Grupp returns to steel production. The resurrection isn't just economic, it's psychological. Germans in 1955 walk differently than they did in 1945. The defeated, desperate survivors become confident participants in Europe's future. The change happens in a decade. 1 decade from total collapse to renewed prosperity. Yet beneath the visible success, questions linger. How much of the recovery depended on hidden wealth surfacing at the right moment? How many of the successful entrepreneurs had access to resources others didn't? How much of the miracle came from simple hard work, and how much from carefully preserved capital emerging from hiding? The answers remain complicated, disputed, incomplete. What's undeniable is that something remarkable occurred. Wealth that seemed destroyed proved transformable. Skills that seemed lost were merely dormant. Networks that seemed broken reconnected. And from the ashes of total defeat rose an economy that would soon lead Europe. Beneath the visible resurrection, shadow networks move billions through channels invisible to casual observers. The Germany, emerging from rubble in 1949 and 50, has 2 economies running simultaneously. The visible economy, reconstruction, exports, manufacturing, draws attention and praise. The shadow economy, older and more sophisticated, operates in whispers and numbered accounts. Swiss banks hold the key. Consider what happened in the years before the war. Wealthy German families, watching Hitler's rise with growing alarm, made quiet decisions. In 1933, a Munich industrialist opens an account at Credit Suisse in Zurich. He transfers funds gradually, carefully, raising no alarms. By 1938, he has moved 30% of his liquid wealth to Switzerland. When the war comes, when his factories are bombed, when everything visible collapses, that Swiss account remains intact, untouched, waiting. Multiply this story by thousands. Jewish families trying to preserve something, anything, before persecution intensifies. Catholic aristocrats who distrust Hitler's regime. Business owners who simply diversify risk across borders. By 1945, Swiss banks hold an estimated $15 billion in German assets, more than the entire Marshall Plan will eventually provide. The numbered account system reaches its fullest expression in these years. A client visits a Swiss bank and receives not a name, but a number. All records reference only that number. Even bank employees don't know who owns which account unless they have specific authorization to access that information. The system creates perfect opacity. Allied investigators trying to trace looted wealth hit walls of Swiss banking law that prove impenetrable. The Bank for International Settlements in Basel plays its own quiet role. This peculiar institution, created in 1930 to handle German reparations from World War I, maintained operations throughout World War II. Its status as an international organization gave it diplomatic immunity. Its technical mandate, facilitating central bank transactions, made it essential for global finance. Its location in neutral Switzerland made it accessible to all parties. During the war, the BIS served as a financial clearinghouse where Allied and Axis central banks conducted business. American and German officials sat on its board simultaneously. Gold looted by Germany flowed through BIS accounts, technically legal, because the bank enjoyed immunity from national laws. After the war, this history becomes deeply controversial. But the infrastructure remains, and that infrastructure proves useful for moving wealth across borders. By 1950, Switzerland holds not just the 15 billion in pre-war deposits, but additional billions that flowed in during and after the war. Some of this money is legitimate, families preserving wealth through catastrophe. Some is questionable, fortunes built through war profiteering or worse. The banks ask no questions. Swiss law protects their silence. Liechtenstein, that tiny principality of 62 square miles tucked between Switzerland and Austria, develops its own specialty in financial opacity. The Anstalt Foundation, a legal structure unique to Liechtenstein, allows wealth to disappear behind corporate veils. A German industrialist whose factories were seized can transfer assets to an Anstalt before confiscation. The Anstalt technically owns the property. The industrialist controls the Anstalt through private agreements never registered publicly. Allied investigators trying to trace assets encounter Liechtenstein's legal system and find it impenetrable. The principality has no requirement to reveal beneficial ownership. Court proceedings are private. Banking records are protected by laws even stricter than Switzerland's. Wealth enters Liechtenstein and effectively vanishes from official records while remaining under the control of its original owners. The rat lines operate with disturbing efficiency. Catholic clergy in Rome, motivated by anti-communism or simple compassion, provide documentation to Germans fleeing Allied prosecution. Some of those fleeing are ordinary soldiers trying to escape POW camps. Others are officials implicated in war crimes. The clergy often cannot tell the difference or choose not to ask. Red Cross officials issue travel documents based on testimonials from clergy. The International Red Cross, desperate to help displaced persons, lacks resources to verify every claim. Croatian priests provide false papers claiming Germans are actually Croatian refugees. Austrian clergy vouch for identities that don't exist. The system works because everyone involved faces overwhelming numbers of genuine refugees mixed with those fleeing. Justice. Ships depart from Genoa throughout 1946 and 47 carrying passengers whose backgrounds dissolve at the waterline. The destinations are predictable: Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay. These South American nations, hungry for European immigrants and European capital, ask few questions about who arrives or what they bring. Buenos Aires, in 1948, has a thriving German-speaking community that didn't exist in 1944. The cafes in certain neighborhoods serve Austrian pastries and German beer. The conversations happen in German. The new arrivals possess surprising amounts of capital, given that they supposedly fled with nothing. A coffee plantation in Brazil acquires a new German manager in 1947. He speaks Portuguese poorly, but understands agricultural chemistry brilliantly. His cultivation methods increase yields dramatically. He seems to have unlimited access to capital for equipment and improvements. No one asks too directly about his past or his resources. The plantation thrives. A mining company in Chile hires a German engineer in 1948. He brings expertise in extraction methods that seems unusually advanced. He also brings connections to Swiss equipment manufacturers who extend generous credit terms. The mine's productivity doubles within 2 years. The engineer becomes wealthy, respected, his past conveniently vague. These patterns repeat across South America. German-speaking communities appear in remote areas. Businesses owned by recent immigrants flourish with access to capital that seems disproportionate to their stated resources. Local economies benefit from the expertise and investment. Questions about origins fade as success becomes undeniable. Submarines add another layer to the mythology. In April 1945, U-boat U-530 departs from Kiel, supposedly bound for Norway. It never arrives. Intelligence reports, unconfirmed, place it off the Argentine coast in July. What was it carrying? Speculation ranges from Nazi officials to gold bars to industrial secrets. The submarine becomes one of many such mysteries. U-977 surrenders to Argentine authorities in August 1945, months after Germany's surrender. Why did it sail to Argentina instead of surrendering to Allied forces in Europe? The crew claims they were following orders to evacuate scientific personnel and documents. Argentine authorities intern them briefly, then release them. Years later, rumors persist about what else the submarine might have carried. Most submarine stories prove false or exaggerated. But the persistent rumors reflect a truth. Valuable things moved across oceans in those chaotic years, and not all of it traveled on passenger ships with proper documentation. Gold is heavy but compact. Diamonds are even more portable. Bearer bonds are lighter still. These items could indeed travel by submarine if the stakes were high enough. Art tells perhaps the most visible story of hidden wealth. The Monuments Men recover 14,000 paintings from Altusay, but this represents only a fraction of Germany's artistic heritage. In 1939, Germany held approximately 650,000 significant artworks in public and private collections. Where did the rest go? Bombing destroyed some. The Dresden firestorm consumed museum collections. Berlin's museums burned, but fire accounts for perhaps 100,000 pieces. Another 100,000 remain in German museums, survived intact. That leaves 450,000 artworks unaccounted for. Some surfaced legitimately. Families who shipped collections to Switzerland before the war retrieved them afterward. The paintings hung in Geneva or Zurich vaults throughout the conflict, then return to rebuilt homes in Munich or Hamburg. These transfers were legal, documented, proper. Others followed murkier paths. The Gutmann family's collection, confiscated by the Nazis, scattered across Europe. Some pieces went to Hitler's planned Führer Museum. Others disappeared into private collections. Decades later, family descendants find their Degas in a Moscow museum, their Kreinak in a Dutch collection, their landscapes scattered across 3 continents. Each recovery requires years of legal battles, provenance research, negotiations. Families with foresight moved collections years before the war. In 1936, a Berlin collector quietly ships his impressionist paintings to a gallery in Paris. In 1937, a Frankfurt banker transfers his old masters to a London auction house for evaluation that becomes permanent storage. These prescient moves preserve fortunes while appearing routine. The amber room vanishes completely. Last documented in Königsberg in 1944, it disappears like smoke. Search teams explore underground tunnels, investigate ruins, follow leads across Eastern Europe. Nothing. $800 million worth of amber panels, gold leaf, and craftsmanship. Gone. The mystery becomes legend, inspiring treasure hunters and conspiracy theorists for 70 years, but thousands of lesser treasures follow similar patterns. A medieval manuscript surfaces in a Swiss auction in 1953, its provenance mysteriously incomplete. A Renaissance painting appears in a Buenos Aires collection with documentation dating only to 1948. A cache of Roman coins emerges from a Munich apartment during renovation in 1962, hidden behind a false wall since 1945. These discoveries continue for decades. In 2012, customs officials in Munich investigate Cornelius Gurlitt, son of art dealer Hildebrand Gurlitt. They discover 1,400 artworks in his apartment, works by Picasso, Matisse, Renoir, Chagall. The collection is worth approximately 1.3 billion euros. Cornelius inherited it from his father, who acquired the pieces during and after the war. Some were legitimate purchases. Others have questionable provenance. Cornelius lived modestly, never selling, keeping his inheritance secret for 67 years. The Gurlitt discovery shocks the art world. How could such a massive collection remain hidden for nearly 7 decades? But it shouldn't surprise. Thousands of families possess artworks of uncertain origin. A grandparent bought a painting during the war. The circumstances were unclear then, and more unclear now. The family keeps it, displays it, enjoys it, but doesn't advertise its existence. Multiply this by thousands of families across Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and the pattern emerges. By 1955, as Germany's economic miracle accelerates, capital that spent 10 years in hiding begins to surface. Those gold coins buried beneath apple trees? They buy down payments on rebuilt factories. Those numbered Swiss accounts? They fund expansion of family businesses. That art hidden in Zurich vaults? It serves as collateral for commercial loans. The re-emergence happens gradually, carefully. A factory owner approaching a bank for expansion capital casually mentions some Swiss holdings that might serve as collateral. A family rebuilding their estate discovers that grandmother's jewelry, thought lost, actually sits in a Zurich vault. An entrepreneur with a brilliant business plan somehow has seed capital from unexplained sources. The official statistics on Germany's recovery never account for this hidden capital. The Marshall Plan gets credit for providing $1.4 billion. German savings and investment explain additional funding. But another river of capital flows beneath the surface, unmeasured in official accounts, but very real in its effects. Economists studying Germany's recovery puzzle over certain anomalies. Investment rates exceed what domestic savings should support. Capital formation happens faster than visible income streams would predict. Business expansion outpaces available credit from official banking channels. The explanations invoke German efficiency, exceptional productivity, or cultural factors, all true, but incomplete without acknowledging the hidden wealth. By 1960, the shadow economy and the visible economy merge. The wealth that hid for 15 years now functions openly. The Swiss accounts that preserved capital through catastrophe now fund legitimate business expansion. The art that hung in Zurich vaults returns to rebuilt mansions. The gold that traveled to South America sometimes flows back as investment capital. The transformation is complete. What began as wealth fleeing catastrophe becomes capital fueling resurrection. The networks that preserved fortunes through destruction now channel them into reconstruction. The systems that hid assets from confiscation now deploy them for growth. Germany's miracle has 2 sources: the hard work and skill everyone celebrates, and the preserved capital that few acknowledge. The moral questions linger. How much of the hidden wealth was legitimately preserved versus stolen? How many of the successful entrepreneurs had unfair advantages from hidden resources? Did the preservation of capital by wealthy families come at the expense of justice for victims? These questions have no simple answers and generate arguments that continue 70 years later. What's undeniable is that wealth proved far more resilient than physical infrastructure. Bombs destroyed cities. Dismantling removed factories. Inflation evaporated currency. Yet beneath all this visible destruction, rivers of capital flowed through hidden channels, waiting for conditions that would allow them to emerge and flourish again. Germany's resurrection happened in full view, but it was funded by resources that spent years in shadow. Some resurrections require architects, men who understand that rebuilding isn't just about bricks and steel, but about psychology, diplomacy, and timing. Germany in 1948 has the workers, the knowledge, the determination. What it lacks are the architects who can negotiate the impossible, forgive the unforgivable, and convince skeptical creditors that a defeated enemy deserves a second chance. Hermann Josef Abs embodies the paradox. As a banker for Deutsche Bank during the Third Reich, he sat on the boards of 40 companies, including IG Farben, which used slave labor. The Allies investigate him after the war. They find nothing criminal enough to prosecute, though plenty questionable enough to end most careers. Instead, Abs becomes West Germany's chief negotiator for debt relief. The London Debt Agreement of 1953 represents his masterpiece. Germany owes approximately 30 billion Deutsche Marks from pre-war loans, Marshall Plan aid, and other obligations. Ibs negotiates with creditors from 20 nations and achieves something remarkable. They agreed to accept 14 billion Deutsche Marks instead. Germany pays less than 50 cents on the dollar. The forgiven debt, 16 billion marks, equals more than the Marshall Plan provided. But Abs accomplishes something more important than numbers. He negotiates payment terms tied to Germany's ability to pay. If the economy struggles, payments decrease. If exports suffer, obligations decline. This prevents the death spiral that strangled Weimar Germany after World War I, when fixed reparations crushed economic recovery and fostered resentment that helped Hitler rise. The creditors agree to this remarkable generosity for Cold War calculations, not charity. A prosperous West Germany serves as a bulwark against Soviet expansion. A bankrupt Germany might fall to communism. The Americans convince reluctant French and British creditors that forgiveness serves their interests. Ibs provides the technical genius that transforms political will into workable agreements. Konrad Adenauer, 73 years old when he becomes Chancellor in 1949, pursues a different kind of architecture. He understands that Germany's resurrection depends on European integration. A strong Germany frightens its neighbors. A Germany bound tightly to Europe, through economic and political ties, makes war impossible. Adenauer negotiates with French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman to create the European Coal and Steel Community in 1951. The structure is brilliant. French and German coal and steel production, the raw materials of war, come under joint authority. Neither nation can build a war machine without the other's knowledge and consent. Economic necessity creates political peace. The symbolism runs deeper than economics. Adenauer and Schuman, old men who lived through 2 wars, build institutions to prevent a third. They recognize that trust must be institutionalized, not just proclaimed. Speeches about peace mean nothing. Shared control of war materials means everything. Adenauer also negotiates reparations to Israel, another impossible task. Germany owes moral debts that no payment can satisfy. Jewish survivors demand justice and compensation. German taxpayers resist paying for Nazi crimes. Adenauer navigates between these positions and reaches the Luxembourg Agreement of 1952. Germany will pay 3.45 billion Deutsche Marks to Israel over 12 years. The payment is massive relative to Germany's economy, approximately 5% of the federal budget. Many Germans oppose it. The far right claims Germany admits guilt unnecessarily. The far left argues Israel shouldn't exist. Adenauer pushes it through anyway, understanding that Germany's moral rehabilitation requires acknowledging the Holocaust and compensating survivors. The industrial families perform their own resurrections, though these prove more controversial. Elfried Krupp, convicted of war crimes for using slave labor, sees his fortune confiscated in 1948. His steel plants, his coal mines, his industrial empire, all seized as part of decartelization efforts meant to prevent German companies from ever again fueling aggressive war. Then the Cold War changes everything. By 1951, American policy shifts. West Germany needs strong industrial capacity to counter Soviet threat. Krupp's expertise and organizational ability matter more than his past. His property returns. His company rebuilds. By 1960, Krupp employs 100,000 workers again, producing steel, machinery, and industrial equipment for markets worldwide. Friedrich Flick follows a similar path. He lost everything in 1945. Coal mines, steel mills, industrial holdings worth hundreds of millions. Allied courts convicted him of war crimes, including slave labor use. He served 3 years in prison. Upon release in 1950, he begins rebuilding methodically. He starts with coal, then expands into steel, then diversifies into automotive and industrial holdings. By his death in 1972, he's Germany's wealthiest man, with assets exceeding 5 billion marks. These resurrections trouble many. War criminals regain fortunes, while victims languish in poverty. Families who profited from Nazi aggression rebuild empires, while those they exploited receive minimal compensation. The American and German governments justify these decisions with Cold War logic. Economic strength matters more than perfect justice. But the architects of resurrection work at smaller scales too. Every Gasthaus owner who rebuilds with hidden savings. Every engineer who reconstructs factory processes from memory. Every banker who reconnects international relationships severed by war. These individuals don't make headlines, but their collective impact exceeds any individual contribution. The apprenticeship system proves crucial. Master craftsmen who survived the war train new generations in skills the world demands. A master toolmaker in Stuttgart takes on apprentices in 1949. He teaches them not just how to operate machines, but how to think about precision, quality, continuous improvement. His apprentices become masters themselves, training others, spreading expertise that makes German manufacturing legendary. Banking relationships, preserved through catastrophe, facilitate commerce. A banker in Frankfurt maintained correspondence with a counterpart in Amsterdam throughout the war. They never met during those years, never discussed business. But in 1948, when German businesses need trade credit, that relationship activates. The Dutch banker trusts his German counterpart. Credit flows, trade resumes. Similar patterns repeat across borders. Swiss, Belgian, British, American bankers who maintained relationships with German counterparts now facilitate recovery. The work ethic, encoded culturally, drives everything. Germans in the 1950s commonly worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week. This isn't forced labor, but voluntary effort driven by desire to rebuild. Factory workers arrive early and leave late. Managers work weekends. Entrepreneurs sacrifice leisure for expansion. The cultural expectation of hard work combines with genuine motivation to create something remarkable. Education maintains standards despite wartime disruption. Technical universities continue producing engineers trained to global standards. The curriculum emphasizes both theoretical knowledge and practical application. A mechanical engineering student in 1952 studies thermodynamics, materials science, and mathematics, but also spends time in workshops learning machining, welding, assembly. This combination of theory and practice creates graduates capable of both designing and building. By 1955, the architectural achievement becomes clear. Germany surpasses Britain in industrial production. This is astonishing. Britain won the war, maintained its empire, received Marshall Plan aid, suffered less destruction. Yet within 10 years of defeat, Germany produces more industrial output. The explanation lies in the combination of preserved human capital, wise economic policy, European integration, debt forgiveness, and relentless work. The cultural factors prove nearly impossible to quantify, but undeniably important. Germans possess what scholars call high social trust, the expectation that others will behave reliably and honestly. This trust, surprisingly resilient despite war and dictatorship, reduces transaction costs. Business deals close on handshakes. Suppliers deliver as promised. Workers show up reliably. These behavioral patterns, inherited culturally and reinforced socially, make economic activity more efficient. The Mittelstand, small and medium enterprises, become the backbone of recovery. These family-owned businesses, often specializing in narrow niches, achieve excellence through focus and persistence. A company making industrial valves employs 200 people, exports to 40 countries, dominates its market segment through relentless quality improvement. Thousands of such companies, each pursuing excellence in specialized areas, collectively create economic strength that large corporations alone couldn't achieve. The architects also include those who said no to easy profits from moral compromise. Some German businesses refused contracts that would have enriched them but required ethical violations. Some bankers declined opportunities to profit from others' desperation. These decisions, individually small, collectively maintain the social trust that enables economic success. By 1960, the architectural achievement is complete. Germany stands as Europe's economic leader, integrated into European institutions, reconciled with former enemies, generating prosperity that benefits all classes. The architects, Abs, Adenauer, countless unnamed business people, workers and citizens, created something remarkable from total destruction. They proved that resurrection requires more than capital and labor. It requires vision, negotiation, wisdom, and the courage to forgive and be forgiven. The reckoning never truly ends. 70 years after the last shot was fired, new claims surface. New discoveries shake families. New documents emerge from archives previously sealed. The echoes of 1945 reverberate through courtrooms, auction houses, and living rooms across the world. Swiss banks hold dormant accounts worth billions, their owners consumed by the Holocaust. A Jewish family fled Vienna in 1938, leaving everything behind except what they could carry. Before fleeing, the father opened an account at Credit Suisse, depositing family savings and jewelry. He died in Auschwitz. His wife died in Theresienstadt. The children scattered across 3 continents. Unaware the account existed, in 1996, a grandson discovers a document in his mother's papers, a deposit receipt from Credit Suisse dated October 1938. He contacts the bank. They have no record of the account. He persists. After years of legal pressure and public scrutiny, the bank acknowledges that accounts matching his grandfather's details existed but were classified as dormant and eventually absorbed into bank reserves. This pattern repeats thousands of times. Swiss banks, facing international pressure in the 1990s, eventually acknowledge holding approximately $1.25 billion in dormant Holocaust-era accounts. They settle claims for $1.25 billion in 1998. But disputes continue. How many accounts disappeared into bank reserves? How much wealth vanished through administrative sleight of hand? The questions persist. Art discoveries continue with startling regularity. In 2010, workers renovating an apartment in Munich break through a wall and discover a hidden space containing 14 paintings, including works by Dürer and Cranach. The owner's grandfather hid them in 1945, telling no one. 2 generations lived in that apartment, unaware that millions in art resided behind plaster. The Gurlitt case explodes in 2012. Customs officials investigating Cornelius Gurlitt for tax evasion discover 1,400 artworks in his Munich apartment and another house in Salzburg. The collection includes pieces by Picasso, Matisse, Renoir, Chagall, Monet, worth approximately 1.3 billion euros. Cornelius inherited them from his father Hildebrand, an art dealer who worked for the Nazis, acquiring degenerate art. The provenance of Gurlitt's collection proves nightmarishly complex. Some pieces Hildebrand purchased legitimately. Others he acquired from Jewish collectors forced to sell. Still others may have been looted. Cornelius spent his life hiding this inheritance, living modestly, never selling, revealing nothing. He died in 2014, leaving the collection to a Swiss museum. Legal battles over individual pieces continue. Every year brings similar discoveries. A Klimt emerges from an Austrian monastery. A cache of gold coins appears during building demolition. A Swiss vault yields paintings hidden since 1944. Each discovery reopens wounds, revives claims, rekindles arguments about limitation periods versus eternal justice. Modern technology changes the hunt. Databases cross-reference looted art with auction records. DNA analysis confirms identities of claimants. Digital imaging reveals erased provenance marks on paintings. The Art Loss Register maintains records of 350,000 stolen items. When a questionable piece surfaces at auction, researchers can check its history within hours. In 2006, a California museum returns a Klimt painting to the heirs of Adele Bloch-Bauer. The painting, worth $135 million, hung in the museum since 1948. The museum believed it acquired the work legally from the Austrian government. But documents revealed the Nazis forced the sale from the Bloch-Bauer family. After 8 years of litigation, the painting returns to the rightful heirs. The German government has paid over 90 billion euros in restitution since 1952. Individual payments to Holocaust survivors. Compensation to Israel. Property restoration in former East Germany. Support for Jewish cultural institutions worldwide. Yet claims persist. Families present yellowed documents, faded photographs, testimony from witnesses with failing memories. Seeking justice for losses that occurred 75 years ago, the moral complexity deepens with time. Should great-grandchildren inherit claims? Do limitation periods apply to Holocaust crimes? What happens when current owners purchased art in good faith decades ago, unaware of its troubled provenance? Courts wrestle with these questions case by case, creating precedents that sometimes conflict. Swiss banking secrecy, perfected to hide Nazi gold, becomes the foundation for global tax avoidance. The numbered account system pioneered in the 1930s now shelters trillions worldwide. Liechtenstein's foundation structures, designed for German wealth preservation, become vehicles for international tax planning. The techniques developed to hide wealth from Allied investigators now serve hedge funds, multinational corporations, and wealthy individuals avoiding taxes legally and illegally. The art market's opacity traces directly to the dispersal of 1945. Provenance gaps become accepted. Private European collection becomes code for unclear origins. The culture of discretion that protected Nazi loot now protects money laundering, tax evasion, and sanctions avoidance. Auction houses implement stricter due diligence now, but the habits formed 70 years ago persist. Even the European Union itself springs from the ashes of German destruction. The vision that animates European integration, making war economically impossible, comes directly from understanding how industrial capacity fueled aggression. The coal and steel community, the common market, eventually the European Union and Euro, all trace their origins to preventing another German catastrophe. The influence spreads in unexpected directions. Germany's apprenticeship system, which preserved skills through catastrophe, becomes a model globally. Countries struggling with youth unemployment study how Germany trains workers. The dual education system, combining classroom learning with workplace training, proves its worth by surviving total disruption. The Mittelstand concept influences business thinking worldwide. Family-owned companies focusing on specialized niches, reinvesting profits rather than maximizing short-term returns. Treating workers as long-term assets, these principles, tested under extreme conditions, offer alternatives to Anglo-American capitalism. The cultural memory of hyperinflation and currency collapse makes Germans suspicious of inflation decades later. The Bundesbank's obsession with price stability, Germany's insistence on fiscal discipline within the European Union, the resistance to quantitative easing, all trace back to the trauma of worthless currency in 1923 and 1948. The collective memory shapes policy generations later. Modern Germany struggles with its dual heritage. The economic miracle proves that nations can recover from total destruction. But the recovery came from preserving elements of the society that enabled Nazi aggression: industrial capability, organizational skill, cultural discipline, celebrating the recovery risks, celebrating systems that enabled horror. The debate continues in schools, museums, and public discourse. How do you honor the Trümmerfrauen who cleared rubble without whitewashing the regime that created the rubble? How do you acknowledge entrepreneurial brilliance without ignoring where some entrepreneurs got their capital? Germany's culture of remembrance, mandatory Holocaust education, preserved concentration camps, memorials throughout Berlin, represents an ongoing reckoning with complicated truths. The families who rebuilt fortunes face their own reckonings. Some acknowledge past crimes and support restitution. Others maintain silence. Still others claim victimhood, arguing that bombing and dismantling constituted sufficient punishment. Family reunions become occasions for difficult conversations as younger generations question how grandfather rebuilt his wealth so quickly, where grandmother got her jewelry, why certain topics remain unmentionable. The pattern of destruction and recovery influences how we think about wealth itself. Germany's experience proves that physical capital can evaporate while human capital persists. Skills survive when buildings burn. Knowledge endures when factories are dismantled. Relationships reconnect when institutions collapse. This suggests that education, training, and social capital matter more for long-term prosperity than natural resources or infrastructure. Yet the recovery also depended on hidden wealth surfacing at opportune moments. The gold buried in gardens, the Swiss accounts maintained in secret, the art hidden in vaults. Without this preserved capital, would recovery have happened as quickly? The question remains unanswerable, but important. As the last survivors of 1945 pass away, direct memory yields to historical memory. The stories become less personal, more abstract. The urgency fades, but the legal and financial consequences persist. Swiss banks still discover dormant accounts. Art still surfaces with questionable provenance. Families still pursue claims through courts. The echoes will continue for generations. Every renovation of old buildings risks discovering hidden wealth. Every archive opening reveals new documents. Every estate settlement might uncover assets with complicated histories. Germany's resurrection from total destruction teaches eternal lessons about wealth's resilience, but also raises eternal questions about justice, complicity, and the price of forgiveness. The German experience reveals something profound about wealth's true nature. Consider what we've witnessed. 360 billion Reichsmarks evaporate overnight. 800 tons of gold vanish. 1,500 factories disappear onto eastbound trains. 8 million homes lie in ruins. Yet within 15 years, Germany becomes Europe's economic powerhouse. How the answer lies in understanding what wealth actually is. We imagine it as solid. Gold bars in vaults, deeds to property, factory equipment humming with production. But Germany's story teaches different lessons. Physical capital can vaporize in months. Buildings burn. Machinery gets confiscated. Currency becomes worthless. The tangible things we associate with wealth prove remarkably fragile. Human capital, knowledge, skills, expertise survives nearly anything. The engineers who designed advanced optics still possess that knowledge after their factories are dismantled. The craftsmen who perfected precision metalwork retain those skills even when their workshops lie in rubble. The chemists who developed industrial processes carry those formulas in their minds across borders, through prisoner camps, into new lives. You can bomb a university, but you cannot bomb what students learn there. Social capital, trust, networks, relationships takes generations to build, moments to destroy, decades to restore. A banker in Frankfurt, who maintained correspondence with a counterpart in Amsterdam, possesses something valuable even when his bank building is rubble. That relationship, built over years of honest dealing, becomes a bridge for rebuilding commerce. Multiply this by thousands of preserved relationships, and you have an invisible infrastructure that supports visible reconstruction, cultural capital, work ethic, educational systems, organizational methods, proves nearly indestructible. The apprenticeship system survived 5 centuries of European history, including wars, plagues, and revolutions. It survived Nazi dictatorship and total defeat. In 1948, master craftsmen resumed training apprentices as if the interruption was temporary. The method persists because it's embedded in culture, not institutions. This pattern repeats throughout history. Rome fell, scattering its wealth across Europe. But Roman law persisted, influencing legal systems for 1,500 years. Roman engineering principles, arches, aqueducts, concrete, survived to inspire Renaissance builders. The physical empire crumbled, but the knowledge empire endured. The Black Death killed 40% of Europe's population between 1347 and 1352. Imagine that scale of catastrophe. Entire towns emptied, farms abandoned, commerce halted. The wealth destruction exceeded anything war could accomplish. Estates worth fortunes became worthless when no one survived to work the land or buy the products. Yet the Black Death triggered the Renaissance. Labor scarcity increased wages. Social mobility increased. New ideas flourished. Destruction created space for transformation. The Library of Alexandria burned, destroying perhaps 500,000 scrolls representing centuries of accumulated knowledge. We remember this as catastrophic loss. But the knowledge hadn't existed only in Alexandria. Copies resided in Constantinople, Damascus, Cordoba, Rome. Scholars had memorized key texts. The ideas had spread beyond any single repository. The library's destruction was real, but the knowledge survived in distributed form. Germany's resurrection from total destruction proves wealth is information, not matter. Skills matter more than machinery. Trust matters more than gold. The ability to organize matters more than physical resources. This understanding transforms how we think about prosperity and disaster. Consider modern implications. Cryptocurrencies promise wealth beyond government reach, echoing numbered Swiss accounts. The technology differs, but the goal remains identical: preserve value through catastrophe, hide assets from confiscation, maintain control when institutions collapse. The numbered account moved wealth across borders through banking secrecy. Cryptocurrency moves wealth through mathematical encryption. The tools change. The impulse persists. Sanctions attempt economic destruction without military force. The United States and European Union impose financial restrictions on Russia, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela. Assets freeze, trade halts, currency values plummet. The goal: create pressure that changes behavior without dropping bombs. But Germany's experience suggests limits. You can freeze bank accounts, but you cannot freeze knowledge. You can prevent technology sales, but you cannot prevent engineers from understanding principles. Sanctions work only if they're comprehensive and sustained, and even then, human ingenuity finds workarounds. Climate change threatens wealth destruction surpassing any war. Sea level rise could submerge coastal cities worth trillions. Extreme weather threatens agricultural systems feeding billions. Resource scarcity may trigger conflicts. The physical destruction could exceed what Germany experienced. Yet the German pattern suggests survival strategies. Wealth will flow like water, finding new channels when old ones close. Coastal cities may flood, but the knowledge of architecture, engineering, governance flows inland. Agricultural systems may fail, but botanical knowledge, farming techniques, and food science persist. Resources may become scarce, but human ingenuity adapts, substitutes, innovates. The physical infrastructure proves replaceable. The knowledge infrastructure endures. Networks survive when institutions collapse. When governments fail, family connections matter. When banks close, trust between individuals enables barter and trade. When supply chains break, local relationships fill gaps. Germany rebuilt partly through formal institutions like the Marshall Plan, but equally through informal networks of families, former business partners, and preserved relationships. The eternal dance between destruction and creation continues across human history. Every generation faces some catastrophe: war, plague, financial collapse, natural disaster. Every generation discovers that what seemed solid melts into air. And every generation learns that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in what we know, whom we trust, and how quickly we adapt. The German story offers both hope and warning. Hope because it proves that total destruction need not mean permanent poverty. Nations can recover, skills persist, knowledge survives, human ingenuity rebuilds. The resilience embedded in human capital, social capital, and cultural capital exceeds our pessimistic assumptions about fragility. But warning too, Germany's recovery depended partly on hidden wealth, the Swiss accounts, the buried gold, the preserved networks. Not everyone had access to these resources. The families who preserved capital through catastrophe recovered faster than those who didn't. The inequality that existed before collapse often reasserted itself afterward. Sometimes amplified, the moral questions persist across time. Should we celebrate resilience when it preserves unjust systems? Should we admire recovery when it depends partly on hidden wealth of questionable origin? Can we honor survivors' achievements without ignoring advantages they possessed? These questions have no simple answers. What remains clear is that wealth transformation follows patterns. Physical capital concentrates, making it vulnerable to confiscation, taxation, destruction. Human capital distributes across millions of minds, making it resilient. Social capital exists in relationships, surviving institutional collapse. Cultural capital embeds in habits and expectations, persisting across generations. The wise across history have understood this. Roman aristocrats educated their children extensively, knowing that knowledge survives when property doesn't. Jewish diaspora communities emphasized education and professional skills over land ownership, understanding that portable knowledge beats immobile assets. Chinese families maintain networks across provinces, recognizing that relationships provide security when governments change. Germany, in 1945, teaches these lessons with unusual clarity, because the destruction was so complete and the recovery so dramatic. The experiment, unwanted and terrible, demonstrated which forms of wealth endure and which evaporate. The results should inform how we build resilience today, invest in education that creates portable skills, maintain networks that cross borders and institutions, develop cultural practices that enable cooperation under stress, preserve knowledge in distributed form, build trust through consistent behavior. These strategies won't prevent catastrophe, but they enable recovery when catastrophe strikes. The cycle continues. Empires rise and fall, wealth concentrates and disperses, institutions flourish and collapse. Through all this churning, certain patterns persist. Knowledge outlasts buildings. Skills survive displacement. Trust enables cooperation when formal systems fail. Adaptability beats rigid attachment to failing strategies. Germany's phoenix rising from ash isn't unique in human history. It's the pattern repeating. Rome fell, then Renaissance Italy flourished. China fragmented, then reunified. Japan rebuilt from atomic destruction. South Korea rose from desperate poverty. The specifics differ. The underlying dynamic remains constant. Catastrophe destroys physical capital, but cannot destroy human capability. As we face uncertain futures, climate disruption, technological transformation, geopolitical instability, Germany's experience offers guidance. Prepare not just by accumulating physical wealth, but by developing resilient knowledge, maintaining trustworthy relationships, and building adaptive capacity. When everything solid melts into air, these prove the foundations worth preserving. The story that began with burning Berlin and empty vaults ends with profound understanding about wealth's nature. It exists not primarily in things we own, but in things we know, people we trust, and systems we maintain. This knowledge, purchased through terrible experience, offers wisdom for every generation, facing its own catastrophes and seeking its own resurrection.